Winter arrived early in the Silvercrest territory. The ancient pines groaned under the weight of fresh snow as winds howled across the moonlit landscape. It was on such a night that Thomas Greymane returned. He walked alone through the blizzard, a solitary figure against the raging elements. At 68 years of age, his once jet-black hair had long since turned silver, matching the landscape surrounding him. Yet despite the frigid cold and the weight of his years, Thomas moved with purpose, his broad shoulders unbowed by time, or the heavy fur cloak draped across them. 30 years of exile had carved lines into his weathered face, but his storm-gray eyes remained sharp, scanning the forest with the practiced vigilance of a man who had survived countless threats. Those same eyes narrowed suddenly as they caught an anomaly in the swirling snow ahead. A scream pierced the howling wind. Distant, desperate. Thomas stopped, head tilted, listening. The sound came again, weaker this time. Without hesitation, his body responded with reflexes that defied his age. His pace quickened, boots crunching through knee-deep snow as he crested the ridge. Below him in a small clearing, a young woman with pale blonde hair struggled against three massive wolves. Not ordinary wolves, rogues, wild shifters who had lost their humanity, surrendered to animal instinct. The girl wielded a broken branch as a makeshift weapon, but her strength was failing. Blood stained the snow around her feet. Thomas reached into his memory, drawing upon decades of combat experience. He calculated angles, trajectories, timing. Then he moved. He descended the slope in a controlled slide, gathering momentum. The first rogue sensed his approach too late. Thomas slammed into the beast with the full weight of his body, driving it away from the girl. His hand found the silver dagger concealed in his boot, and in one fluid motion, he buried it to the hilt in the creature's throat. The remaining rogues turned their palmated eyes, fixing on the new threat. They circled, growling saliva dripping from yellowed fangs. Thomas stood protectively in front of the injured girl, his posture revealing nothing of his advanced years. "Stay behind me," he instructed, voice low and steady. The larger of the two rogues lunged. Thomas sidestepped with surprising agility, using the beast's momentum against it. He grabbed its scruff and drove it headfirst into a nearby pine. The impact was thunderous, sending snow cascading from branches above. The third rogue hesitated, sensing something dangerous about this silver-haired human. It backed away slowly before turning to flee into the forest. Thomas knelt beside the girl, who had collapsed against a tree trunk. Her face was ashen from blood loss, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. You killed them without shifting," she whispered. "Experience often trumps raw strength," Thomas replied, examining her wounds. "What's your name, child?" "Morgan Moonshade." Thomas paused, recognition flickering in his eyes. "Moonshade, any relation to Edward Moonshade?" The girl looked away. "He was my father. He died when I was young." Thomas nodded solemnly. "I knew him. A good man." He tore a strip of cloth from his undershirt and bound her bleeding arm. "These woods aren't safe, especially for one traveling alone." "I had no choice," Morgan said bitterly. "The village elders said I bring bad luck. They gave me until sunrise to leave Silvercrest territory." "And why would they think that?" Morgan hesitated, then met his gaze defiantly. "Because I'm 19 and still can't shift. They call me Wolfless, an aberration." Thomas studied her thoughtfully. In the wolf territories, the inability to shift was considered a grave defect, especially in one who should have manifested their wolf years ago. Yet there was something about this girl, a quiet strength beneath her fragile exterior. "We need shelter," he said finally. "Can you walk?" She nodded, gritting her teeth as she struggled to her feet. Thomas supported her weight against his side, and together they trudged through the deepening snow. As they walked, memories flooded through Thomas. 30 years since he had walked these forests. 30 years since he had served as war counselor to Alpha King Marcus before everything changed. Thomas remembered standing in the war room of Silvercrest Castle, sunlight streaming through stained glass windows, as he argued passionately against the king's proposed invasion of the Eastern Territory. "The Eastern Wolves have been our allies for generations," Thomas had insisted, pointing to the ancient map spread across the oak table. "This aggression is unnecessary and dangerous. The Eastern Alpha has grown weak," Marcus had countered, his golden eyes flashing with ambition. "Their territory has resources we need. The Council agrees with me." "The Council fears you too much to disagree," Thomas had replied, his voice lowering. My king, I have served you faithfully for 20 years. I beg you to reconsider this path. But Marcus would not be dissuaded. The invasion proceeded with devastating consequences. Thousands died on both sides. And when Thomas took drastic measures to end the bloodshed, he was branded a traitor and sentenced to exile. His mate had died in his absence, his position filled by younger, more aggressive wolves who fueled Marcus's expansionist ambitions. Now leading the injured girl through the frozen forest, Thomas wondered what had become of the kingdom in his absence. He would soon find out. They reached a small hunter's cabin as night deepened. Thomas broke the rusted lock with a powerful kick and ushered Morgan inside. The interior was dusty but intact with a stone fireplace and simple furnishings. Within minutes, Thomas had a fire crackling, casting warm light across the wooden walls. "You're not from here," Morgan observed, watching him from a worn chair as he tended her wounds with surprising gentleness. "I was. Once." Thomas applied a poultice of medicinal herbs to her lacerated arm. "A lifetime ago." "You're him, aren't you?" Morgan's voice dropped to a whisper. "The traitor counselor, the one who betrayed Alpha King Marcus." Thomas's hands stilled momentarily before continuing their work. "History is written by the victor's child. Remember that." "Why return now after all these years?" Thomas secured the bandage before meeting her gaze. "Because something is wrong with the territories. Even in my exile, I could feel it. The moon bond that connects all wolves has grown strained, distorted. I came to discover why." Morgan looked away. "Everything's wrong here. Since Alpha King Marcus died, Regent Dominic Blackthorn has ruled. The people starve while he feasts. Young wolves suffer from moon rage, losing control of their shifts. Some say it's a curse. And when did this begin? About 6 months ago, after the Autumn Moon Festival." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll reach Shadow Pine Village. I have an old friend there who might help us." As Morgan drifted into exhausted sleep, Thomas stood at the cabin's single window, staring into the darkness. His return would not go unnoticed for long. Dominic Blackthorn had been a young, ambitious member of the Royal Guard during Thomas's time as counselor. If he now ruled as regent, it meant Alexander Marcus's son and rightful heir had not claimed the throne. Something was very wrong indeed. Morning broke clear and cold. They set out at first light, Thomas setting a pace that belied his age. Morgan struggled to keep up, her injuries slowing her despite Thomas's ministrations. "How did you kill those rogues without shifting?" she asked as they walked through the winter forest. "I've never seen anyone fight like that." "When you live 30 years among humans, you learn to survive without relying on your wolf," Thomas replied. "Besides, shifting at my age takes more energy than it's worth for most confrontations." "Can you still shift?" A ghost of a smile crossed Thomas's face. "When necessary." They crested a hill and Thomas paused, his expression darkening. Below stretched a valley that had once been verdant farmland. Now it lay barren, dotted with abandoned homesteads. In the distance, dark smoke rose from chimneys of Shadow Pine Village, once the thriving heart of Silvercrest's agricultural region. "This land was fertile when I left," Thomas murmured. "What happened here?" "Regent Dominic's taxes," Morgan explained. "Farmers couldn't keep enough of their harvest to survive the winter. Most fled to human territories or died trying." Thomas's jaw tightened. "And the Alpha Council permits this," Morgan laughed bitterly. "The Council exists only to rubber stamp Dominic's decrees. Those who oppose him disappear." They were halfway down the hillside when Thomas suddenly tensed, grabbing Morgan's arm and pulling her behind a massive fallen tree. Seconds later, the rhythmic thud of hoofbeats reached their ears. A patrol of 6 mounted guards in Silvercrest colors thundered along the road below their leader, sporting the silver insignia of Dominic's personal guard. "Increased patrols," Thomas whispered. "Dominic fears something." "The resistance, probably," Morgan whispered back. "There are rumors of a group fighting against the regent's rule, led by someone called the Shadow Alpha." Thomas waited until the patrol disappeared around a bend before leading Morgan onto the road. They proceeded cautiously toward the village, staying close to the tree line to enable a quick retreat if necessary. Shadow Pine Village was a shadow of its former self. Where once bustling markets had thrived, now hollow-eyed children played in muddy streets. Buildings that had stood for generations showed signs of disrepair. The village square, once the proud center of community life, had been transformed into a gallows platform. Thomas pulled his hood lower, concealing his distinctive silver hair. "We need supplies," he murmured, "and information." They entered the village's only tavern, a dreary establishment called the Broken Fang. Inside, a handful of locals nursed drinks in silence, their expressions wary as they noted the newcomers. The innkeeper, a heavy-set man with a scar bisecting his right eyebrow, eyed them suspiciously. "We don't get many travelers these days," he said as Thomas approached the counter. "Just passing through," Thomas replied, sliding several silver coins across the worn wood. "Need supplies and a hot meal for my daughter." The innkeeper's demeanor softened at the sight of silver. "Kitchen's still open. Got rabbit stew and day-old bread." Thomas ordered food from Morgan, then casually asked, "Notice the patrol on the road. Trouble in these parts." The innkeeper leaned closer. "Regent's men are hunting resistance fighters. Word is they raided one of Dominic's tax caravans 3 nights ago. Took everything and distributed it among the villages." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Bold move." "Foolish move," the innkeeper corrected. "Dominic has put a bounty on the Shadow Alpha's head, 20,000 gold pieces." As they ate, Thomas observed the tavern's patrons. Despite their downtrodden appearance, he noticed subtle signs of communication between them. A nod here, a finger tap there. The resistance had sympathizers even here in plain sight of Dominic's patrols. They were finishing their meal when the tavern door burst open. 3 royal guards strode in, hands resting on sword hilts. The lead guard, a young wolf with cruel eyes, surveyed the room before addressing the silent patrons. "By order of Regent Dominic Blackthorn, all travelers must present identification papers and state their business in Shadowpine." Thomas tensed imperceptibly. Exile had stripped him of citizenship in the territories. He had no papers. Worse, if his identity were discovered, he would face immediate execution. The guard approached their table. "Papers," he demanded, holding out his hand. Thomas raised his eyes slowly, his posture relaxed despite the danger. "My apologies, sir. We're from Winterhold Village. Our papers were lost when rogues attacked us in the forest." The guard's eyes narrowed. "Convenient excuse. You'll both come with me to the garrison for questioning." Morgan tensed beside him, fear evident in her quickened breathing. Thomas laid a calming hand on her arm, his mind calculating options. Fighting here would endanger innocent villagers. Running would only confirm their guilt. "Of course, officer," Thomas said agreeably. "Just allow my daughter to finish her meal. She's still recovering from her injuries." The guard hesitated, then nodded curtly. 5 minutes, then we go." As the guard stepped away to speak with his companions, Thomas leaned close to Morgan. "When I create a distraction, slip out the back door and head for the forest. Follow the North Star until you reach a large oak split by lightning. Wait for me there." "What about you?" Morgan whispered. "I'll find you. Trust me." Morgan looked doubtful but nodded. Thomas casually reached for the salt cellar, knocking over his mug of ale in the process. The liquid spilled across the table and onto the floor. "Clumsy old man," he muttered loudly, standing to mop up the spill. As he did, he stumbled, bumping into a burly patron. The man, already in his cups, rose with a snarl. "Watch yourself, old-timer." Thomas raised his hands in apology but deliberately stepped on the man's foot. The resulting confrontation escalated quickly, drawing the attention of everyone in the tavern, including the guards. In the ensuing chaos, Morgan slipped unnoticed through the kitchen and out the rear door. Thomas allowed himself to be restrained by the guards, offering no resistance. They dragged him outside, where their commander waited with a patrol of mounted soldiers. "Found this one causing trouble, Captain," the guard reported. "No identification, suspicious circumstances." The captain dismounted, approaching Thomas with measured steps. He was tall for a wolf, with broad shoulders and the confident bearing of one accustomed to command. His face was partially concealed by his helmet, but something about his movements struck Thomas as familiar. "What's your name, old man?" the captain demanded. "Thomas, just Thomas." The captain studied him silently for a long moment, then turned to his men. "Secure the prisoner. We return to the fortress immediately." They bound Thomas's hands and forced him onto a spare horse. As they rode from the village, Thomas caught the captain watching him with an unreadable expression. Hours later, they arrived at an imposing stone fortress nestled against a mountainside. Unlike the village, this structure showed no signs of decay. Its walls were solid, its iron gates newly forged. Inside, Thomas was led through torchlit corridors to a private chamber. rather than the dungeons he expected. The room was spartanly furnished with a table chairs and a crackling fireplace. The guards secured him to a chair, then departed, leaving only the captain. When they were alone, the captain removed his helmet. Thomas found himself looking into a face that was hauntingly familiar, a younger version of his own. "It really is you," the captain said, his voice thick with emotion. "After all these years." Realization dawned. "Samuel, my brother's son," Samuel Greymane nodded, his composure cracking. "They said you were dead. Everyone believed it." "It was safer that way," Thomas replied softly. "For everyone." Samuel approached, gripping Thomas's shoulder with a powerful hand. "Why return now? Do you have any idea the danger you're in?" "I felt the territory's pain even in exile. The moon bond is fracturing, Samuel. I came to discover why." Samuel's expression darkened. He glanced at the door, then lowered his voice. "What I'm about to tell you would mean my death if Dominic discovered it. I am the Shadow Alpha." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "You serve as Dominic's captain while leading the resistance against him. Dangerous game, nephew." "Necessary game," Samuel countered. "Dominic trusts me. It provides access to information, allows me to protect my people from within." "And Alexander, what of Marcus's son, the rightful Alpha King?" Samuel's face tightened with pain. "That's the reason I risk everything. Alexander lives, but he's not himself." "Explain." Samuel paced the room, gathering his thoughts. 6 months ago, during the Autumn Moon Festival, Alexander was preparing for his coronation. The night before the ceremony, he was hunting in the northern woods. He returned, changed, feral, unable to shift back to human form. Thomas leaned forward. "Moon rage. The most severe case I've ever seen. He exists now in permanent wolf form with only occasional flickers of human consciousness. Dominic claimed regency until Alexander recovers, but privately works to ensure he never does." "Where is Alexander now?" "Hidden at our resistance stronghold. We've tried everything to help him, but nothing works. Each passing day, his humanity slips further away." Samuel's voice broke. "He doesn't even recognize me anymore, his own cousin." Thomas fell silent, processing this information. Finally, he asked, "And the girl Morgan, what do you know of her?" "The Wolfless one." Samuel looked surprised. "Very little. An oddity, nothing more." "Why, perhaps more than an oddity," Thomas mused. "She has an unusual energy. I'd like to see Alexander tonight." Samuel looked uncertain. "Bringing an exiled traitor to our stronghold would not sit well with many in the resistance. The younger wolves especially, they've grown up on stories of your betrayal." "Then don't tell them who I am." "Not yet, but I need to see Alexander." Samuel considered this, then nodded. "I'll arrange it. But what about the girl?" "I left her at the Lightning Oak. We'll collect her on the way." Night had fallen by the time they departed the fortress. Samuel provided Thomas with a captain's cloak to conceal his identity as they rode with a small patrol, allegedly conducting night reconnaissance. Once beyond sight of the fortress, Samuel led them off the main road into the dense forest. They found Morgan exactly where Thomas had instructed her to wait, huddled against the massive lightning-scarred oak for warmth. She greeted Thomas with obvious relief, then eyed Samuel and his men warily. "It's all right," Thomas assured her. "This is my nephew Samuel. He's taking us somewhere safe." The resistance stronghold was ingeniously concealed within a series of natural caves beneath an abandoned iron mine. Torches illuminated rough-hewn tunnels that opened into larger chambers. Wolves of various ages moved purposefully through the underground complex, carrying the supplies, mending weapons, or tending to the wounded. As they entered, conversations hushed. Suspicious gazes followed their progress, particularly focused on Thomas. Samuel led them to a private chamber where a group of resistance leaders had gathered around a crude map table. "Who's this old man, Samuel?" demanded a muscular wolf with a jagged scar across his face. "We don't need more mouths to feed." "He has expertise. We need Thorn," Samuel replied evenly. "Experience fighting Dominic's kind of warfare." "Experience?" Thorn scoffed. "He looks like he'd break a hip drawing a sword." Thomas regarded the younger wolf calmly. "Age and treachery will overcome youth and skill every time, boy." Thorn bristled, stepping forward aggressively until Samuel intervened. "Enough. He's here at my invitation. That should be sufficient." The tension in the room remained palpable as Samuel outlined the resistance's current situation. Their numbers had grown to nearly 300, but supplies were dwindling. Dominic's forces outnumbered them 10 to 1 with superior weapons and resources. As the leaders debated strategy, Thomas observed silently. Their plans were reactive, focused on small raids rather than addressing the underlying problem. They fought like wolves, instinct, driven, direct, and ultimately predictable. It would never be enough to defeat Dominic. "You're planning to fail," Thomas said, finally, his quiet voice cutting through the heated discussion. All eyes turned to him. Thorne sneered, "Easy to criticize from the sidelines, old man. These raids keep your people fed, nothing more." Thomas continued undeterred. "Dominic remains comfortably in power while you exhaust yourselves on his periphery. Meanwhile, the real problem, the moon rage affecting the territories, remains unsolved." Samuel's expression was thoughtful. "What would you suggest?" Thomas approached the map, his finger tracing mountain ranges and valleys with the confidence of one intimately familiar with the territory. "Stop thinking like wolves. Start thinking like hunters. Dominic expects direct confrontation. It's the wolf way. Instead, target his supply lines here, here, and here. Not to steal supplies, but to create the illusion of a much larger resistance force." He continued, outlining a strategy that relied on misdirection and psychological warfare rather than direct confrontation. The younger wolves looked skeptical, but Samuel and the older leaders listened with growing interest. "This could work," Samuel admitted when Thomas finished. "But it still doesn't address our primary concern, Alexander's condition and the spreading moon rage." "Take me to him," Thomas said. "Now." Samuel led Thomas and Morgan deeper into the cave system to a chamber separated from the others by a heavy iron gate. Inside, illuminated by a single torch, a massive black wolf paced restlessly. Even to Thomas's experienced eye, this was an exceptional specimen, powerful, majestic, with unusual silver markings on its chest. "Alexander," Samuel called softly. The wolf's head snapped up, yellow eyes fixing on the visitors with predatory intensity. A low growl rumbled from its throat. "He doesn't recognize anyone anymore." Samuel said, his voice tight with pain. "Last week he nearly killed one of our best healers when she tried to examine him." Thomas studied the wolf intently. "The rage has almost consumed him. I've seen this before during the Eastern War. Something unnatural is happening here." Alexander suddenly lunged at the bars, snapping and snarling. Samuel and Thomas stepped back instinctively, but to their astonishment, Morgan moved forward. She approached the gate without fear, her hand outstretched. "Morgan, don't," Samuel warned. But the girl paid no heed. She knelt before the gate, her eyes locked with Alexander's. Incredibly, the wolf's aggression subsided. It approached cautiously, sniffing at her hand through the bars. "What in the moon's name?" Samuel whispered. Thomas watched in fascination as Morgan gently touched the wolf's muzzle. At the contact, Alexander visibly calmed, the rage in his eyes dimming. "She soothes him," Thomas murmured, "just as I suspected." After several minutes, Morgan withdrew her hand. Alexander remained calm, watching her with almost human intelligence before retreating to the back of his enclosure. "How did you do that?" Samuel demanded once they had left the chamber. Morgan looked as surprised as anyone. "I don't know. I just felt I could help him somehow." Thomas's expression was thoughtful. "You have a gift, Morgan Moonshade. Rare and valuable, especially now." "What gift? I'm wolfless. Remember, a defect." "Perhaps not wolfless," Thomas countered, "but different. The old texts speak of wolves whose power manifested in healing rather than shifting. They were called moon healers, though none have been born in centuries." Hope flickered across Morgan's face, quickly replaced by skepticism. "If I were something special, wouldn't I know it, feel it? Gifts often lie dormant until needed," Thomas replied, "or until properly awakened." That night, while the resistance slept, Thomas sat with Morgan in a quiet corner of the main cavern, illuminated by the soft glow of dying embers. He began teaching her about the territories, their history, and the true nature of the wolf bond. "Most believe our ability to shift is simply a physical transformation," he explained, his deep voice carrying the weight of ancient wisdom. "But it's much more. It's a spiritual connection to the moon itself, a covenant made by our ancestors." Morgan listened entranced as Thomas spoke of the early days when wolves first organized into territories, of the Great Wars and subsequent peace. He told her of the forgotten rituals, the moon songs and blood oaths that had bound their people together. "Real strength isn't in fangs or claws," he told her, but in the lessons learned through many moons. The young forget this. They see only power, never wisdom. He taught her breathing techniques to center herself, meditation practices to quiet the mind and sense the moon's energy. Though skeptical at first, Morgan soon found herself experiencing strange sensations tingling in her fingertips, occasional flashes of others' emotions, a growing awareness of energies flowing around her. What you did with Alexander, what Thomas said, was channel healing energy instinctively. With training, you could control and direct it. To cure moon rage, Thomas's expression grew serious. Possibly, but everything has its price, Morgan. Using such gifts draws energy from your own life force. Push too far, too fast, and you risk yourself. Dawn was breaking when Samuel urgently summoned them. Scouts had reported a large force of Dominic's soldiers approaching the abandoned mine above. "They've found us," Samuel said grimly. 300 soldiers at least with wolfsbane arrows and silver chains. Panic spread through the stronghold as resistance members rushed to gather weapons and supplies. Thomas observed the chaos with a critical eye before raising his voice to address those nearest. "Calm yourselves. Panic serves only your enemy." The commanding tone, unexpected from the elderly newcomer, brought momentary silence. "There are 7 exit tunnels from this mine," Thomas continued. "Samuel, divide your people into 7 groups. Each group takes a different route, traveling fast and light. Rendezvous at the ancient grove 3 days hence." Samuel nodded, recognizing the tactical wisdom. "And Alexander, we can't move him while he's in this state." Thomas turned to Morgan. "Can you calm him enough for transport?" The girl looked uncertain but determined. "I can try." While Samuel organized the evacuation, Thomas and Morgan returned to Alexander's chamber. The Black Wolf was agitated, sensing the commotion. Morgan approached cautiously, speaking in soft, soothing tones. When she placed her hand on his muzzle, Alexander growled but did not snap. Gradually, his aggressive posture relaxed. "Good," Thomas encouraged. "Now try channeling energy as we practiced. Visualize calm flowing from your hand into him." Morgan closed her eyes, concentrating. A soft bluish glow emanated from her palm. Alexander's eyes reflected the strange light, and he lay down submissively, allowing Samuel's men to secure him with specially reinforced restraints. "Extraordinary," Samuel murmured, watching the process. By mid-morning, the evacuation was complete. Thomas, Morgan, Samuel, and 20 selected fighters escorted Alexander through a narrow tunnel that emerged in a densely wooded ravine. They could hear Dominic's forces storming the mine above, but their small group slipped away undetected. As they made camp that evening in a sheltered valley, Thomas studied the night sky thoughtfully. The moon was approaching its zenith, nearly full. Time was running short. "Samuel," he said quietly, "what do you know of the Moonstone?" Samuel looked up sharply. "The ancient relic." "It's a myth, Uncle. A story for pups." "Not a myth," Thomas insisted. "I've seen evidence of its existence. The old texts in Marcus's private library spoke of it, a crystal formed from the first moon, tear capable of restoring balance to wolves gone astray." "You think it could cure Alexander and the moon rage spreading through the territories?" "I believe it's our only hope." Morgan joined them, her face drawn with exhaustion after helping calm Alexander again. "What's a moonstone?" Thomas explained the legend, a sacred crystal hidden by the first Alpha Queen in a temple atop the highest mountain in the territories. According to ancient texts, it contained the essence of the moon's blessing, the original source of their shifting ability. If it exists, Thomas concluded, it might be powerful enough to counteract whatever darkness affects Alexander in the territories. "That's Frost Peak Mountain," Samuel said doubtfully. "No one has successfully climbed it in generations. The upper reaches are perpetually locked in blizzards." "I know a path," Thomas replied. "I climbed it once with your father before you were born." Samuel considered this. "The ancient grove where our people are regrouping lies at Frost Peak's base. We could begin the ascent from there." Thomas nodded in agreement. "We'll need a small team. The path is treacherous, unsuitable for large numbers." "I'm coming," Morgan stated firmly. "Of course," Thomas said. "Your abilities may prove essential." As night deepened around them, the small band of wolves made plans for a journey that would either save their kingdom or doom them all. Thomas gazed at the troubled young prince in wolf form, then at Morgan, whose hidden gifts were just beginning to emerge. An unlikely pair, yet in them might lie the salvation of all wolfkind. The ancient grove awaited them, and beyond the towering challenge of Frost Peak Mountain. Thomas felt the weight of responsibility settle on his aged shoulders. He had returned to right an old wrong to complete unfinished business. Now fate had handed him a task far greater than he had imagined. The journey to redemption had just begun. Dawn painted the ancient grove in gold and amber as Thomas led their small band through towering trees that predated even the oldest living wolf. Massive trunks rose like ancient pillars, their canopies so dense that the forest floor remained in perpetual twilight despite the morning sun. The air here tasted different, somehow purer, charged with old magic that Thomas could feel in his bones. Morgan walked beside him, her eyes wide with wonder. "I never knew such a place existed within our territories." "Few remember," Thomas replied. "The ancient grove has been sanctuary to our kind since the first shifting. These trees have witnessed the rise and fall of 100 Alpha Kings." Behind them, Alexander padded silently in his wolf form, calmer now, thanks to Morgan's touch, but still wild, unpredictable. Samuel and 5 trusted warriors completed their party, each carrying a supplies for the arduous climb ahead. The remainder of the resistance fighters were taking alternate routes to the rendezvous point, traveling in small groups to avoid detection. Thomas paused at a massive oak whose trunk bore spiral carvings as from root to uppermost branches. He placed a weathered hand against the ancient bark, closing his eyes briefly, as though in communion with the living wood. "My father brought me here when I was 12, he said quietly. "The age of first shifting. Every Greymane for 10 generations made the same pilgrimage." Samuel approached, standing beside his uncle. "My father never brought me. He said the old ways were dying, that modern wolves had no need for such sentimentality. And now look where modern thinking has led us," Thomas observed without rancor. "A fractured kingdom, wolves turning feral traditions forgotten." They continued deeper into the grove, following a path visible only to Thomas's experienced eye. The forest floor gradually sloped upward as they approached Frost Peak Mountain's base. By midday, they reached a clearing dominated by a circle of 13 standing stones, each twice the height of a man, and covered in ancient glyphs. "The Moon Council," Thomas explained, "where the first Alpha Queen received her crown from the 12 territorial leaders, before the kingdoms were united." Samuel studied the weathered stones with newfound interest. "I always thought this was just folklore mothers told pups at bedtime." "History becomes legend when we stop living it," Thomas replied. Morgan approached one of the stones, her fingers hovering over its surface without quite touching. "They're warm," she murmured, surprised, "and I feel something, like a vibration." Thomas watched her curiously. "The stones are said to resonate with those who carry old blood. Perhaps your gifts run deeper than we suspected." They made camp within the stone circle that night, the ancient monoliths providing an unexpected windbreak against the mountain's bitter drafts. As flames from their small fire danced against the darkening sky, Thomas shared stories from the territory's early days, tales of the first shifters, the great wars between wolf and human, and finally the peace that allowed their societies to develop separately but in harmony. Before the territories were divided, he told them, all wolves answered to a single alpha, the White Queen. Her gifts were extraordinary, even by our standards. She could calm raging wolves with a touch, heal mortal wounds with a breath, and command absolute loyalty without force. Morgan listened intently. "What happened to her?" "She vanished during the Great Divide when civil war split the United Territories into the 7 regions we know today. Some say she retreated to Frost Peak's summit to commune directly with the moon, leaving the Moonstone behind as her legacy." "If this Moonstone is so important," one of Samuel's warriors interjected skeptically, "why hasn't anyone retrieved it before now?" "Many have tried," Thomas admitted. "None returned. The mountain has its own defenses, storms, treacherous terrain, and some say guardians placed by the White Queen herself." Their conversation was interrupted by Alexander's sudden growling. The black wolf had risen to his feet, hackles raised as he stared into the darkness beyond their circle. Samuel immediately signaled his men to defensive positions. "What is it?" Morgan whispered instinctively, moving closer to Thomas. The old wolf inhaled deeply, nostrils flaring as he parsed the night air. "Rogues, at least a dozen, maybe more." No sooner had the words left his mouth than shadowy forms materialized at the forest's edge, glowing eyes reflecting the firelight, massive shapes hunched and hungry. Unlike normal wolves, these creatures moved with unnatural jerking motions, their bodies misshapen as though caught between human and wolf form. Moon rage, Samuel muttered, drawing his silver sword. Advanced stage. The rogues circled their camp, testing the perimeter with increasing boldness. Thomas studied their movements carefully, noting patterns and weaknesses where Samuel's men saw only threats. They're coordinating, he observed with a surprise. Rogues don't hunt in organized packs. They've been changing, Samuel replied grimly, growing smarter, more tactical. It's why we've lost so many scouts recently. The largest rogue, a monstrous creature with patches of fur missing to reveal scarred gray skin, suddenly charged. Two more followed immediately after targeting different sides of the camp in a coordinated assault. Samuel and his men met the attack with practiced efficiency, silver blades flashing in the firelight. The rogues fought with unnatural strength, each requiring multiple wounds before falling. Thomas positioned himself protectively before Morgan drawing a pair of silver daggers from his boots. Stay close to Alexander, he instructed her. Your presence will keep him calm enough to defend himself without attacking us. As the battle intensified, Thomas demonstrated fighting techniques that had Samuel's men staring in astonishment despite the danger. He moved with fluid economy, never wasting motion or energy, each strike precise and devastatingly effective. Where the younger wolves relied on strength and speed, Thomas used positioning, timing, and the rogues' own momentum against them. Watch their left side, he called to Samuel, as the younger wolf struggled with a particularly massive opponent. They favor the right paw when attacking, shift your weight to counter. Samuel followed the instruction, instinctively sidestepping the creature's powerful swing and finding the opening to deliver a killing blow. The tactical advantage spread as Thomas continued calling out observations, turning what might have been a desperate struggle into a coordinated defense. When the last rogue fell, Samuel approached Thomas with newfound respect. You fought like no wolf I've ever seen. Those techniques were developed during my exile, Thomas explained, cleaning his blades methodically. When you can't rely on shifting, you learn to observe, to understand the physics of combat, rather than dominating through raw power. Morgan had kept Alexander remarkably calm throughout the battle, the massive black wolf staying protectively near her instead of joining the frenzy. Now she knelt beside one of the fallen rogues, examining it with clinical detachment. This isn't natural, she said quietly. Look at the veins near the throat, black like poison. Thomas crouched beside her, his experienced eyes confirming her observation. You're right. This isn't ordinary moon rage. Something is corrupting these wolves from within. Like Alexander, Samuel asked, joining them. Similar but different, Thomas replied. Alexander's condition seems more controlled, selective. These creatures have been completely overtaken. They burned the rogue bodies at Thomas's insistence, a practice rarely followed in the territories where fallen wolves were traditionally left for the forest to reclaim. Whatever afflicts them might spread, when he explained. We take no chances. The attack had one unexpected benefit. Alexander's behavior toward the group had shifted. The black wolf now moved among them with greater awareness, his yellow eyes occasionally showing flickers of human intelligence. He had recognized them as allies during the battle, a significant improvement from his previously feral state. They resumed their journey at first light, leaving the ancient grove behind as they began the ascent of Frost Peak Mountain. The lower slopes were densely forested, the path occasionally marked with stone cairns left by travelers centuries before. Thomas led them confidently, despite the decades since his last climb, his memory of the route undiminished by time. The tree line ends about 1,000 feet up, he explained as they hiked. After that, we face bare rock and eventually ice. The real challenge begins where vegetation can no longer survive. As they climbed higher, Thomas shared techniques for conserving energy, navigating difficult terrain without exhausting themselves, identifying safe footholds, reading weather patterns from cloud formations. The younger wolves, initially skeptical of the old man's stamina, found themselves struggling to maintain his pace. Pace yourself according to breath, not muscle, Thomas advised when he noticed one young warrior falling behind. Your body will tell you when you're pushing too hard, listen to it. By midday, they reached a plateau offering their first unobstructed view of the journey ahead. Frost Peak's summit disappeared into a crown of clouds, its upper reaches perpetually shrouded in swirling mists and snow. The territory spread below them like a living map, forests, rivers, distant villages, and beyond them the stone walls of Silvercrest Castle, where Dominic now ruled. Samuel gazed at the distant castle, his expression hardening. From here it looked so small. Hard to believe one wolf within those walls could cause so much suffering. Power magnifies both virtue and vice, Thomas replied. Dominic was ambitious even as a young guard, but not cruel. Something changed him, or perhaps revealed what was always beneath the surface. They made camp on the plateau using the remaining daylight to rest and prepare for the more demanding climb ahead. Thomas took the opportunity to continue Morgan's training, teaching her techniques, to focus her healing energy more precisely. Visualize your power as light, he instructed as they sat cross-legged on sun-warmed stones, be it flowing from your core to your hands, concentrated but controlled. Morgan closed her eyes following his guidance. A soft blue glow emanated from her palms, stronger than before. It feels different, she said, less wild, more directed. Good. Now try to sense Alexander's condition without touching him. She turned towards a black wolf who rested several yards away, extending her awareness rather than her hands. After several minutes of intense concentration, she spoke. There's something wrapped around his mind, like dark ribbons squeezing. It's not part of him, it's foreign invasive. Thomas nodded. Can you affect it from this distance? Morgan frowned with effort. Small beads of sweat formed on her forehead as the blue light intensified. Alexander stirred, whining softly as though experiencing a troubling dream. I can touch it, she said, voice strained, but not change it. It's too strong, too entrenched. That's enough for now, Thomas said gently, noting her exhaustion. You've confirmed what I suspected. The moon rage is not a natural condition, but something deliberately inflicted. By whom, Dominic? Perhaps, but such power exceeds what any ordinary alpha could wield. There may be darker forces at work here. The next morning brought unexpected challenges. They awoke to find a thick fog had enveloped the plateau, reducing visibility to mere feet. More concerning, Alexander had grown agitated overnight, pacing and growling despite Morgan's calming presence. Something on the mountain is affecting him, Thomas observed. We need to move quickly before his condition deteriorates further. They continued their ascent, the forest gradually thinning until they found themselves on bare rocky slopes. The fog persisted, transforming familiar landscapes into alien terrain. Thomas relied on memory and instinct to guide them, identifying landmarks barely visible through the swirling mist. Stay close, he warned. It would be easy to become separated in these conditions. Despite his caution, disaster struck mid-morning. They were traversing a narrow ridge when the ground beneath one of Samuel's warriors suddenly crumbled. The young wolf disappeared with a startled cry, the fog swallowing him completely. Samuel rushed to the edge, peering into the milky void. Ethan, he called, can you hear me? A faint response echoed up from below. Neither words nor human cry, but the distinct howl of a wolf in distress. He must have shifted instinctively during the fall, Samuel said, preparing to descend. I need to find him. Thomas placed a restraining hand on his nephew's shoulder. Wait, listen carefully. They fell silent. The howl came again, but something about it raised the hair on Thomas's neck. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate, almost like a... It's a lure, Thomas said sharply. That's not Ethan. No sooner had he spoken than multiple howls arose from the fog below, confirmed by Alexander's immediate aggressive response. The black wolf snarled into the mist, sensing enemies hidden from human perception. Rogues, Samuel realized. They're hunting us. Not just hunting, Thomas corrected grimly. Herding. They're manipulating our path, using the fog as cover. He quickly reorganized their group, placing Morgan and Alexander at the center, with fighters forming a protective circle around them. We continue upward, he instructed. The rogues seem confined to lower elevations. Their corrupted forms may be unable to survive higher altitudes. The theory proved correct. As they climbed higher, the howls grew more distant, eventually fading entirely. The fog too began to dissipate, replaced by crystal-clear air that burned their lungs with its purity and cold. By late afternoon, they reached a sheltered valley nestled between two of the mountain's subsidiary peaks. To their surprise, stone ruins dotted the landscape, evidence of ancient habitation where none should exist at this altitude. A village? Samuel asked incredulously. All the way up here? Not just any village, Thomas replied, examining the weathered structures with reverence. If I'm right, these are the remains of Whitehaven, the White Queen's original settlement, established before she united the territories. They explored the ruins cautiously, finding evidence of sophisticated construction techniques unknown in modern wolf architecture. Perfectly fitted stone blocks formed buildings that had withstood centuries of mountain weather, their surfaces carved with symbols similar to those on the standing stones in the ancient grove. Inside one of the larger structures, they discovered a central chamber containing a stone altar. Embedded in the chamber floor was a detailed map of the territories, each region delineated by inlaid metals of different colors. Gold for Silvercrest, copper for the eastern woods, silver for the northern peaks, and so on. "This is incredible," Samuel breathed. "Our histories contain nothing about this place." "The victors write history," Thomas reminded him. "After the Great Divide, the new Alphas would have wanted to erase evidence of unified rule. Easier to control territories that believed they were always separate." Morgan was drawn to the altar itself, her fingers tracing inscriptions too worn to decipher completely. "There's power here," she murmured, "dormant but present like embers beneath ash." As evening approached, they made camp within the ancient settlement, finding unexpected shelter from the mountain's brutal winds. While Samuel's remaining warriors secured the perimeter, Thomas explored further, searching his memory for details that might help their quest. In a small structure set apart from the others, he discovered a hidden chamber beneath a carefully balanced stone slab. Inside lay a collection of artifacts, perfectly preserved scrolls, written in an ancient language, ceremonial objects of silver and moonstone, and most significantly, a detailed map showing the path to Frost Peak's summit. He returned to their camp with his findings, spreading the brittle map before his companions. "The path is more complex than I remembered," he admitted. "There are sections here marked with warning symbols I don't recognize." Morgan studied the ancient document with unusual intensity. "I can read some of this," she said, surprising everyone, including herself. "Not all, but fragments. This symbol warns of those who walk between forms, guardians, I think." Thomas regarded her with growing fascination. "How is that possible? This language died out centuries ago." "I don't know," she confessed. "The meaning just comes to me like remembering something I once knew." They spent the evening poring over the documents, piecing together fragments of knowledge about the path ahead in the Moonstone itself. According to the scrolls, the sacred crystal contained the essence of the first gift, the original moon blessing that enabled wolves to shift forms. The text suggests it was used in healing rituals, Morgan explained as she deciphered more symbols, specifically for wolves who had lost control of their shifting ability. "Like those afflicted with moon rage," Samuel noted. "Exactly, but there's a warning here too." She frowned, concentrating on a particularly complex passage. "The stone demands balance. What is taken must be given. What is healed must be transferred, I think is the word." Thomas considered this soberly. A price. Powerful magic always requires sacrifice. They were discussing the implications when Alexander suddenly lifted his head, ears pricked forward in alert attention. A moment later, the black wolf rose and padded purposefully toward the ruin's edge. Rather than restrain him, Thomas motioned for the others to follow quietly. Alexander led them to a viewpoint overlooking their back trail. Far below, through gaps in gathering clouds, they could see pinpricks of torchlight, dozens of them moving up the mountain in organized formation. "Dominic's men," Samuel growled. "They must have captured one of our separated groups and extracted information." Thomas studied the approaching force with calculating eyes. "They're several hours behind us, but moving fast, too fast for regular troops on this terrain." "What does that mean?" "It means they have a guide, someone intimately familiar with the mountain." Even as he spoke, movement in the nearer distance caught his attention. A lone figure scaled the cliffs below their position with unnatural speed, using hand and footholds invisible in the gathering darkness. Thomas narrowed his eyes, focusing his aging vision until the climber's features became clear. "It can't be," he whispered, recognition dawning with chilling certainty. The climber reached a ledge just below their position and paused, looking upward directly at their group. Even at this distance, there was no mistaking the distinctive facial scar and cold, calculating eyes. "Jason," Samuel hissed, recognizing his former lieutenant. "The one who betrayed our position at the stronghold." Thomas shook his head grimly. "Not just a traitor. Look at his movements, too fluid for human form, too controlled for wolf. He's operating in the space between forms, drawing power from both simultaneously." "Is that possible?" Not naturally, someone has augmented him, modified his shifting ability, and if Jason can do it, then Dominic's entire force might have the same advantage. Samuel finished the strategic implications dawning on him. They retreated to their camp, quickly packing essential supplies while Thomas outlined a new plan. "We need to split up," he said decisively. "Samuel, take your men and Alexander east along the secondary ridge. Create a diversion and make them think our entire party goes that way." "While you do what?" Samuel demanded. "Morgan and I will continue to the summit. With fewer climbers, we can move faster, avoid detection." Samuel looked unconvinced. "You're asking me to leave you with just the girl for protection against enhanced soldiers?" Thomas smiled thinly. "I survived 30 years of exile, nephew. Besides, our objective is the Moonstone, not combat. Stealth will serve us better than strength." After brief but intense debate, Samuel reluctantly agreed. They would separate at first light, giving Thomas and Morgan a head start, while Samuel's group created a false trail to draw Dominic's forces away from the true objective. That night, as final preparations were made, Morgan sought Thomas at the camp's edge where he stood watching the distant torches of their pursuers. "You knew this would happen," she said quietly, "that we'd need to make the final ascent alone." Thomas didn't deny it. "I suspected. The old texts often mention that the Moonstone reveals itself only to those it chooses. A large armed party was never likely to succeed. And you believe it will choose us, an exiled old wolf and a wolfless girl." Thomas turned to her, his weathered face softened by moonlight. "Age and inability to shift are human concerns, Morgan. The moon sees deeper to the essence of what we are." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "There's something I haven't told you, something I sensed from our first meeting." "What?" "Your scent. It's faint, almost imperceptible, but distinctive to those who know what to seek. You carry traces of royal blood, Morgan Moonshade. Not just any royal line, but the White Queen's own." Morgan stared at him in disbelief. "That's impossible. My parents were commoners. My father was a carpenter, my mother a healer." "Edward Moonshade was indeed a carpenter," Thomas agreed. "But your mother, Elena, did you never wonder why she possessed such unusual healing skills? Why Dominic's predecessor specifically targeted your family during the purges?" Morgan's expression shifted from skepticism to dawning realization. "They told me it was random chance that my parents were killed, a regrettable tragedy during civil unrest. Nothing about their deaths was random or regrettable to those who ordered them. Your mother was the last known descendant of the White Queen's younger sister. The bloodline was thought extinguished with her death, but it appears the executioners overlooked one small child." The revelation settled over Morgan like a physical weight. Years of questions suddenly answered. Her inability to shift her unusual healing abilities, the strange affinity for ancient languages and symbols, all inherited traits from a lineage she never knew existed. "If what you say is true," she said slowly, "then Dominic would have every reason to want me dead. The existence of royal blood outside his control threatens his legitimacy." "Precisely. Which is why tomorrow, when we separate from the others, we don't follow the main path to the summit." Thomas produced the ancient map indicating a nearly invisible trail marked in faded ink. "We take the path of moons, a route known only to the royal bloodline and their most trusted advisors." Dawn revealed a transformed landscape. Overnight snow had fallen at the higher elevations, covering the ancient ruins in a pristine blanket of white. The air sparkled with ice crystals, each breath visible as plumes of vapor in the intense cold. Thomas and Morgan prepared for their climb, dressing in layers and packing only the most essential supplies. Samuel provided them with his best weapons, a silver short sword for Thomas and a dagger for Morgan, though both hoped to avoid combat entirely. 3 days, Thomas told his nephew as they prepared to part ways. "If we haven't returned by then, don't waste lives attempting to find us." Samuel clasped his uncle's forearm in the traditional warrior's farewell. "The resistance needs your wisdom, old wolf. Try not to die on this frozen rock." "The resistance needs legitimate leadership more," Thomas countered, glancing meaningfully at Alexander. "Focus on keeping our future king alive." As Samuel's group departed eastward with the massive black wolf in tow, Thomas led Morgan toward a seemingly impassable rock face on the valley's western edge. Using landmarks visible only to his experienced eye, he located a narrow fissure concealed behind a stone outcropping. The path of moons begins here, he explained, squeezing through the opening. Centuries ago, the White Queen's personal guard used this route to bypass the mountain's normal defenses. The hidden passage wound upward through Frost Peak's interior, occasionally opening into small caverns adorned with luminescent crystals that provided natural illumination. Strange rock formations resembled frozen waterfalls pillars, and in one chamber, a perfect spiral staircase that appeared carved by inhuman hands. Did wolves build all this? Morgan asked, voice hushed with wonder. Not wolves alone, Thomas replied. According to legend, the White Queen formed alliances with other beings, mountain spirits, elements, creatures forgotten by modern wolves. Together, they created sanctuaries like this one. They climbed steadily through the mountain's heart, the passage gradually narrowing until they were forced to proceed in single file. Thomas led with confident familiarity despite never having used this specific route before. Something about the path resonated with his instincts, guiding his choices at each junction and decision point. By midday, they emerged onto a wind-scoured ledge, high on Frost Peak's western face. Below them, clouds obscured the lower slopes, giving the impression they stood on an island floating in a sea of white. Above the summit gleamed tantalizingly close, perhaps another 1,000 feet of vertical climbing. We rest briefly, then continue, Thomas said, offering Morgan dried meat from their supplies. The weather may turn against us without warning at these altitudes. As they ate, he studied her with quiet assessment. The journey had changed her visibly, not just physically, though the soft-faced girl had indeed been replaced by a leaner, more confident young woman. The transformation went deeper, to her essence, as though layers of false identity were being stripped away to reveal her true nature. You look more like your royal ancestors with each passing day, he observed. Morgan touched her face self-consciously. I still don't feel royal, just Morgan trying to survive. The best rulers often begin that way. Power sought is rarely power deserved. They resumed climbing as afternoon shadows lengthened across the mountainside. The path of moons had served them well, allowing them to bypass the most treacherous terrain and remain hidden from Dominic's forces. But the final approach to the summit would force them onto exposed ridges where concealment would be impossible. Thomas moved more cautiously now, testing each handhold and footstep. Age was finally beginning to tell in the tightness of his breathing, the slight tremor in muscles pushed beyond normal endurance. Morgan noticed his struggle but said nothing, understanding the old wolf's pride would reject any suggestion of weakness. They reached a narrow stone bridge spanning a dizzying chasm just as the sun touched the horizon. Wind howled through the gap, threatening to pluck them from the precarious crossing. Thomas paused, studying the ancient structure with concern. The map showed this bridge intact, but that was centuries ago. It may not hold our weight now. Morgan peered at the weathered stones, then closed her eyes in concentration. The blue glow they had come to associate with her healing power emanated from her hands, but instead of directing it toward a person, she extended her awareness into the bridge itself. The core stones remain strong, she said after a moment. But we should cross one at a time, staying close to the inside edge. Thomas nodded, impressed by her growing mastery of abilities she hadn't known she possessed days earlier. You first. I'll follow once you're safely across. Morgan began the crossing, moving with deliberate care despite the wind's buffeting force. Halfway across, a stone shifted beneath her foot, crumbling away into the abyss below. She froze, heart pounding. Steady, Thomas called from behind her. Find your center of gravity, then shift your weight gradually to solid footing. Following his guidance, Morgan completed the crossing safely. Thomas began his own journey across the ancient span, his movements methodical and precise despite his age. 3/4 of the way across, disaster struck. A section of the bridge's outer edge gave way, the collapse rapidly spreading toward the center where Thomas stood. Morgan cried out in warning, but Thomas was already moving, his decades of experience translating instantly into life-saving action. As stones fell away beneath him, he launched himself forward in a desperate leap towards solid ground. His body slammed into the cliff edge, arms scrabbling for purchase on the icy rock. Morgan lunged forward, grabbing his wrists before he could slip away. For a critical moment, all that prevented Thomas's fall into the abyss was the grip of a girl who had spent her life believing herself weak and defective. But Morgan Moonshade was neither of those things, as both now discovered. With strength born of necessity and heritage, she pulled the old wolf to safety. They collapsed together on the narrow ledge, breathing heavily as the last of the ancient bridge fell away behind them, leaving no possibility of retreat by that route. "It seems the mountain has made our decision for us," Thomas observed wryly when he had caught his breath. "Forward is the only option now." Night was falling as they reached a plateau just below the summit. Temperature dropped precipitously with the sun, the air so cold it crystallized their breath instantly. They found shelter in a shallow cave barely more than an indentation in the mountainside and built a small fire from the precious fuel they carried. "Tomorrow we reach the summit," Thomas said, warming his stiff hands by the flames, "and hopefully the Moonstone. And if Dominic's forces find us first," Thomas's expression grew solemn, "then we ensure they don't obtain the stone, whatever the Bakhtin." They huddled close to the fire as night deepened around them. Outside their shelter, stars blazed with unusual intensity in the thin mountain air, and a waxing moon cast silver light across the snow. "We never discussed what happens after," Morgan said quietly. "If we succeed in finding the Moonstone and healing Alexander, what then?" Thomas gazed into the flames. "Alexander takes his rightful place as Alpha King. The territories begin to heal. Balance returns. And us? What becomes of an exiled traitor and a girl who can't shift?" The old wolf smiled faintly. "History is full of second chances, Morgan. Perhaps this is ours." As they drifted towards sleep, exhausted by the day's climb, neither noticed the subtle change occurring outside their small cave. The stars dimmed one by one, obscured by clouds gathering with unnatural speed around Frost Peak's summit. By midnight, the mountain was enveloped in a storm that seemed to rage specifically around the upper slopes, as though the peak itself were summoning defenses against intruders. Thomas woke to absolute darkness, the fire long extinguished. Something had disturbed his sleep, some sixth sense honed by decades of survival in hostile environments. He reached for Morgan, finding her already awake beside him. "Something's coming," she whispered, confirming his suspicion. Thomas strained his senses. Through the cave entrance, he could see snow falling in thick curtains driven horizontally by ferocious winds. But behind the storm's voice, he detected something else, a rhythmic sound, metallic and deliberate. Climbing gear, spikes being driven into ice. "Dominic's men," he breathed. "They've found a way up." Despite the blizzard conditions, they packed swiftly and prepared to move. Their only advantage now was proximity to the summit, perhaps a final hour of climbing, versus the longer approach their pursuers faced from below. They stepped out into the storm's fury instantly, assaulted by winds strong enough to stagger even Thomas's sturdy frame. Visibility extended mere feet in any direction, the summit completely obscured by swirling snow. "Stay close," Thomas shouted above the gale. "Link arms so we don't become separated." They began the final ascent, each step a battle against elements that seemed determined to repel them. Ice formed on eyebrows and lashes, clothes stiffened with frozen moisture. Fingers grew numb despite heavy gloves. Only Thomas's unerring instinct for direction kept them moving upward when all visual references had disappeared in the white chaos. After what seemed hours but might have been minutes in the disorienting conditions, the slope gradually lessened. Thomas realized they had reached the summit plateau, though the temple they sought remained invisible in the blizzard. "It should be here somewhere," he called to Morgan, who pressed close behind him. "The White Queen's temple, built around the original impact site of the Moonstone." They moved forward, cautiously aware that in such conditions, a single misstep could send them plummeting from unseen edges. Suddenly, Morgan tugged sharply at Thomas's sleeve. "There," she shouted. Following her pointing finger, Thomas discerned a darker shape within the whiteness, a vertical form where all else was chaotic movement. As they approached, the silhouette resolved into massive double doors, framed by stone pillars encrusted with ice, a temple entrance, perfectly preserved at 14,000 feet, where no ordinary structure should exist. The doors, twice the height of a man, bore intricate carvings depicting wolves in various forms, the moon in its phases, and at the center, a crystalline object that could only be the Moonstone. Despite their apparent weight, they swung inward at Morgan's touch, as though welcoming her specifically. They stumbled inside the sudden absence of wind, creating an eerie silence broken only by their labored breathing. The temple interior was illuminated by an otherworldly blue glow emanating from crystals embedded in the walls, same color Thomas noted with interest as the energy Morgan channeled during healing. The circular chamber soared upward to a domed ceiling, open to the sky, though strangely no snow entered, despite the raging storm visible through the aperture. At the chamber's center stood a raised altar, and upon it, suspended in midair without visible support, rotated a crystal the size of a man's fist, the moonstone itself pulsing with interior light, in rhythm with the phases of the moon. "It's real," Morgan breathed, approaching the altar with reverence. After all this time, Thomas followed more cautiously, his experienced eyes scanning the chamber for hidden threats or traps. According to the text, only one of royal blood can safely claim the stone. Morgan hesitated at the altar's edge. "And if the texts are wrong, if I'm not what you believe me to be, then we've climbed this mountain for nothing, and Dominic wins by default," Thomas replied simply. Making her decision, Morgan stepped onto the altar's platform. The air around her seemed to thicken, time itself slowing as she approached the levitating crystal. When her fingers were mere inches from its surface, the moonstone suddenly flared with brilliant light, bathing the entire chamber in radiance so intense that Thomas was forced to shield his eyes. When the light subsided, Morgan stood transformed. Her ordinary clothing had been replaced by flowing white garments of a material Thomas had never seen before, simultaneously substantial and ethereal. Her blonde hair lifted slightly in an unfelt breeze, and her eyes shimmered with the same blue energy as the crystal before her. Most significantly, the moonstone now rested in her outstretched palm, accepted and claimed. "Morgan," Thomas called, uncertain whether the young woman before him remained the same person he had guided up the mountain. She turned toward him, recognition warming her expression. "It's still me, Thomas, but also more. I can feel the memories of those who came before flowing through me." The moment of wonder was shattered by sounds from outside the temple, heavy footsteps crunching through snow, voices calling instructions. Dominic's forces had reached the summit. Thomas moved swiftly to the temple entrance, peering through the gap in the massive doors. Through breaks in the blizzard, he counted at least 20 soldiers approaching, led by a figure he recognized instantly, despite the intervening decades. Dominic Blackthorne had aged well, his face bearing few lines despite the gray streaking his once dark hair. He moved with the confidence of absolute power, flanked by Jason and other enhanced warriors who seemed untroubled by the extreme conditions that would debilitate ordinary wolves. "They're here," Thomas reported grimly. "Dominic himself leads them." Morgan joined him at the entrance, the moonstone now suspended from a chain around her neck. "We can't let them take it." The text warned that in the wrong hands the stone could corrupt rather than heal. Thomas nodded, his tactical mind already assessing options. "The storm works in our favor for now, blinds them as much as it would us. But we need a plan beyond simple escape. They control all routes down the mountain." Before Morgan could respond, a voice called from the swirling snow, a voice Thomas hadn't heard in 30 years, yet recognized instantly. "Thomas Greymane," Dominic shouted. "I know you're inside. You've led me on quite a chase, old friend." Thomas tensed at the false familiarity. He and Dominic had never been friends, merely acquaintances serving the same king from different positions. "Show yourself, traitor," Dominic continued. "Let's end this game before more lives are needlessly lost." Thomas glanced at Morgan, seeing determination settle over her features. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "the moonstone must reach Alexander. It's the only hope for healing him, and through him the territories." Thomas nodded soberly. "Then let an old wolf do what he does best, buy you time." With that, he stepped out into the storm to face his final adversary, while behind him, Morgan Moonshade pressed the moonstone to her heart and prepared for the greatest test of her newly discovered heritage. Snow swirled around Thomas Greymane as he stepped from the ancient temple into the full fury of the mountain storm. Wind tore at his clothing, ice crystals stinging his weathered face as he moved deliberately toward the approaching figures. Despite the extreme conditions and the threat advancing through the whiteness, the old wolf walked with the steady confidence of one who had made peace with his path. "Dominic," Thomas called, his deep voice carrying despite the howling gale. "It's been a long time." The figures halted. Through veils of blowing snow, Thomas could see Dominic raise a hand signaling his men to hold position. The regent stepped forward alone, closing the distance until only 20 paces separated them. Time had been kind to Dominic Blackthorne. At 58, he remained formidable, his bearing regal, despite the harsh conditions. Only the silver threading, his dark hair, and the hardened lines around his eyes revealed the passing decades. "Thomas Greymane," Dominic replied, voice smooth as polished stone. 30 years of exile, yet here you stand, where few dare to tread, still interfering in matters beyond your authority. Some principles transcend authority, Dominic. You taught me that once. A ghost of a smile touched Dominic's lips. Before ambition taught me better lessons. His gaze shifted to the temple entrance behind Thomas. Where is the girl my scouts reported 2 climbers? Gone. I sent her down the eastern face with what we came for. Dominic's expression didn't change, but the temperature seemed to drop further as his eyes narrowed. You've become an accomplished buyer in your exile, old friend. No one descends the eastern face in these conditions. The girl remains inside with the Moonstone. Thomas shrugged, seemingly unconcerned by the accusation. Believe what you wish. I merely buy time while fate unfolds as it must. Always the philosopher. Dominic gestured, and his enhanced warriors spread out in a semicircle. Unfortunately, I lack patience for philosophy these days. Jason, secure the temple. The rest of you take the traitor alive if possible. Dead if necessary. Jason, once Samuel's trusted lieutenant, now moved with the unnatural fluidity of one existing between forms, neither fully human nor fully wolf, but a disturbing hybrid that defied natural law. He advanced toward the temple while other warriors closed on Thomas from multiple angles. Thomas made no move to flee or draw weapons. Instead, he smiled, an expression so unexpected it gave the approaching warriors pause. Before your men waste their energy, he said conversationally to Dominic, perhaps you should explain what you've done to them. Do they know the price of the enhancements you have granted? The accelerated aging, the gradual dissolution of their humanity. Uncertainty flickered across several warriors' faces. Dominic frowned, irritation briefly marring his controlled demeanor. Desperate tactics from a desperate man, he said dismissively. My warriors are blessed, not cursed, evolved beyond ordinary limitations. Yet they follow orders without question. Curious for those supposedly evolved. Thomas turned to address the warriors directly. Ask yourselves why your alpha fears the Moonstone enough to climb a mountain in a blizzard. What healing might reveal about the power corrupting your bodies? Dominic's patience evaporated. Enough! Take him! 2 warriors lunged forward. Thomas moved with surprising speed for his age, sidestepping the first attacker and using the man's momentum to send him sprawling into the snow. The second warrior received an elbow strike to the throat, precise and devastating, dropping him to his knees, gasping for breath in the thin air. More attackers converged. Thomas drew no weapons, relying instead on positioning and timing honed through decades of survival. He fought defensively, conserving energy, while maximizing impact, each move deliberate, never wasted. One warrior fell to a precisely aimed strike to the temple. Another collapsed when Thomas targeted pressure points that temporarily paralyzed limbs. But numbers and youth eventually told. A blow caught Thomas across the back, driving him to one knee. Another warrior landed a strike to his ribs, the sickening crack audible even through the storm's fury. Thomas grimaced, but did not cry out, regaining his footing with effort. Impressive for a man of your years, Dominic observed coldly, but ultimately futile. Thomas managed a bloody smile. I don't fight to win, Dominic. Only to delay. Delay what exactly? The answer came not from Thomas, but from behind them. The temple doors swung wide, emitting a blast of intense blue light that cut through the blizzard like a beacon. In the doorway stood Morgan, transformed by her communion with the Moonstone. The crystal pulsed at her throat, synchronizing with her heartbeat as tendrils of blue energy coursed over her skin. That, Thomas said with quiet satisfaction. Even Jason, who had nearly reached the temple, halted at the sight. The hybrid warrior retreated a step instinctively, recognizing a power beyond his comprehension. Morgan descended the temple steps, each footfall melting the snow beneath it. The storm itself seemed to respond to her presence, winds calming around her, while continuing to rage at the summit's edges. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that resonated in the chest of every wolf present. Dominic Blackthorne, she said, the name itself seeming to carry power. Your campaign ends here. Dominic recovered quickly from his surprise, his face settling into calculated assessment. The wolfless girl now playing with forces she doesn't understand. He turned to his warriors. Take her, carefully. I want the stone undamaged. None moved. Did you not hear me? Dominic demanded. They hear you, Morgan replied. But they also hear something else now. She raised her hand, the Moonstone's light intensifying. The truth their bodies have been trying to tell them since you corrupted their shifting ability. Dominic's enhanced warriors shuddered as one, their forms flickering as though seen through heat waves. Several fell to their knees, clutching their heads or chests. "What are you doing to them?" Dominic snarled. "Nothing they don't want," Morgan answered. "The Moonstone merely offers choice where you impose control." Jason was the first to fully transform his unnatural hybrid state, giving way to pure wolf form, a magnificent russet creature that shook snow from its coat before turning to face Dominic with newfound clarity in its amber eyes. One by one, the other warriors followed, shifting completely into their wolf forms, the agony of their corrupted state visibly lifting. "Impossible," Dominic breathed. "The White Queen's blood flows in her veins," Thomas said, straightening despite his injuries. "The Moonstone responds to its rightful wielder." Dominic's composure finally cracked, his face twisting with rage and disbelief. "No, the royal bloodline died generations ago. We made certain of it." "Not as certain as you believed," Thomas replied, satisfaction evident in his tone. Morgan approached Thomas, her hand gently touching his injured side. Blue energy flowed from her fingers, knitting broken ribs and torn flesh. The old wolf sighed as pain receded, nodding thanks before turning back to Dominic. "You face a choice, Regent," Thomas said, the title carrying subtle mockery. "Surrender yourself to judgment or face consequences here and now." Dominic laughed, the sound harsh against the mountain silence. Surrender to whom? A traitorous old man and a girl barely out of childhood. His hands clenched, body tensing as he prepared to shift forms. "I am Alpha of Silvercrest, Regent of the Seven Territories. I bow to no one." His transformation began, but immediately faltered, the process visibly painful, as his body fought against some internal resistance. Morgan watched with compassionate understanding. "The corruption has reached your core," she observed quietly. "You've used forbidden magic to enhance your powers for so long that your natural shifting ability has atrophied." Dominic staggered, his partial transformation grotesque. "What have you done to me?" he gasped. "Nothing," Morgan replied. "The Moonstone merely reveals truth. Your body can no longer maintain the lie you've forced upon it." Dominic's anger transformed to desperation. With unexpected speed, he lunged not at Morgan, but at Thomas, a silver dagger appearing in his hand. "If I fall, I take the architect of my downfall with me." Thomas, still recovering from his healing, couldn't fully evade the attack. The blade sliced across his chest, drawing blood despite Morgan's earlier intervention. The old wolf grunted in pain, but remained standing, grasping Dominic's wrist to prevent a second strike. "Always the same flaw," Thomas said through gritted teeth, "attacking in anger rather than strategy." Morgan stepped forward, the Moonstone flaring. "Enough!" A pulse of energy emanated from the crystal separating the two men. Dominic was thrown backward, landing heavily in the snow. When he tried to rise, his limbs refused to cooperate. "What you've done to the territories, to Alexander, to countless innocents requires justice," Morgan said, approaching the fallen regent, "but not revenge." She knelt beside Dominic, who flinched away from her outstretched hand. "I won't harm you," she assured him, "but you must face what you've become." When her fingers touched his forehead, Dominic went rigid. The Moonstone pulsed rhythmically, pulling darkness from him like poison from a wound visible. Strands of shadow extracted from his eyes and mouth, even his pores drawn into the crystal, where they dissipated in flashes of purifying light. Dominic screamed, the sound primal and agonized, before collapsing unconscious in the snow. Morgan swayed, the effort of the purification clearly taxing, even with the Moonstone's power augmenting her natural abilities. Thomas steadied her. "What did you do?" "Remove the corruption." Morgan explained, her voice weaker, but still resonant with newfound authority. The same dark magic he used to enhance his warriors and inflict moon rage had taken root in his own spirit. He wasn't just using the power, he was being consumed by it. Thomas looked thoughtful. "That explains much." Dominic was ambitious, but never cruel before the Autumn Moon Festival. Something changed him. "Something or someone," Morgan agreed. The corruption felt deliberate, intelligent, as though Dominic was as much a victim as a perpetrator, though that doesn't excuse his actions. The wolves that had once been Dominic's enhanced warriors now gathered around them, awaiting direction in their natural forms. The storm had subsided completely, leaving Frost Peak's summit bathed in unexpected sunshine as clouds dissipated like morning mist. We need to get Alexander, Thomas said, thinking practically despite the extraordinary events. The Moonstone must heal him next, if the territories are to have their rightful king. Morgan nodded, but her expression remained troubled. There's something else, Thomas. Something I saw when the Moonstone first accepted me. She hesitated, choosing words carefully. The corruption affecting Dominic Alexander, the territories, it all traces back to a single source. Someone who has remained hidden, working through others. Who? Before Morgan could answer, one of the wolves growled a warning. All heads turned to see a figure ascending the final slope to the summit, an elderly woman leaning on an ornate staff, her progress slow but inexorable despite the treacherous terrain. As she approached, Thomas tensed in recognition. Elder Amara, he said incredulously. How did you? The ancient wolf who had welcomed them at the Resistance stronghold smiled, the expression not reaching her cold eyes. How did I climb a mountain at my advanced age the same way you did, Thomas? Greymane, determination and a touch of assistance. She gestured and the air around her shimmered. Her appearance transformed, age falling away like a discarded cloak to reveal a woman in her prime, tall, regal, with striking features framed by silver hair that caught the sunlight like polished metal. Forgive the deception, she said, her voice no longer frail but commanding. Elder Amara has been dead for decades. I merely borrowed her form when it suited my purposes. Morgan gasped, the Moonstone flaring in response to her recognition. It's her, the source of corruption, I sensed. Thomas positioned himself protectively between Morgan and the newcomer. Who are you? The woman's smile widened. Has history forgotten me so completely? I am Selene, Shadowmoon's sister to the White Queen, your young friend so resembles. She studied Morgan with cold calculation. The family resemblance is striking, though you lack your ancestors' poise. The White Queen's sister, Thomas repeated, pieces falling into place. The histories mention a sister who turned against her, who was banished for forbidden magic. Banished? Selene spat, her composure cracking momentarily. I was erased from history by my self-righteous sister after I discovered power she was too weak to embrace. She collected herself, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her immaculate garments. But family reunions aside, I've come for what belongs to me. Her gaze fixed on the Moonstone at Morgan's throat. That crystal was meant for me, the culmination of centuries of planning. Morgan's hand rose protectively to the stone. The Moonstone accepted me. It recognized the White Queen's bloodline. Of course it did, Selene agreed smoothly, because my blood also flows in your veins, child. Your mother Elena wasn't descended only from my sister, but from both of us, the result of bloodlines converging generations ago. The perfect vessel combining both sides of royal heritage. She stepped closer, ignoring Thomas's warning stance. Why do you think I arranged your parents' protection when Dominic's predecessors purged royal descendants? Why I guided your development from afar, ensuring you survived until the proper time. You killed my parents, Morgan said, the accusation cold with certainty. Selene waved dismissively. A necessary sacrifice. Their deaths ensured Dominic never suspected your importance, allowing you to develop your abilities without interference. Her expression softened in a parody of maternal concern. Everything I've done has led to this moment, Morgan. You were meant to claim the Moonstone, but not for yourself, for us. Thomas saw the manipulation for what it was, but Morgan hesitated, centuries of ancestry and power pulling at her consciousness through the Moonstone. Selene pressed her advantage. Join me, she urged. Together with the Moonstone's power, we can reshape the territories as they were always meant to be ruled by those with the wisdom and strength to truly lead. And Alexander, Thomas interrupted, the moon rage spreading through the territories, was that your doing as well? Selene's attention shifted to him, annoyance flickering across her perfect features. Necessary tools. Dominic was ambitious but malleable. I merely directed his ambition toward useful ends. She gestured casually. As for the moon rage, consider it a refining fire separating those strong enough to evolve from those who cling to outdated limitations. Limitations like compassion, honor. The traditions that bind our people together, Thomas challenged. Selene laughed, the sound musical, yet chilling. Oh, Thomas, still the idealist after all these years. The world has no place for such quaint notions anymore. Power is the only reality that matters, and I've waited centuries for mine. She turned back to Morgan, hand extended in invitation. The Moonstone responds to bloodline child. My bloodline as much as my sister's. Give it to me freely, and I'll ensure you a place of honor in the new order. Refuse, her expression hardened. And I'll take it anyway, though less pleasantly. Morgan looked from Celine to Thomas, conflict evident in her expression. The old wolf met her gaze steadily, offering neither judgment nor direction, merely trust in her own judgment. In that silent exchange, Morgan found her answer. The Moonstone chose me, she said, straightening to her full height. Not just because of bloodline, but because of purpose. You seek to dominate, I seek to heal. That makes all the difference. Celine's beautiful face twisted with rage. Fool girl, you know nothing of the power you reject. I know enough, Morgan replied calmly. I know that true strength comes not from dominance, but from wisdom. Thomas taught me that. Thomas? Celine sneered. An exiled has been clinging to relevance through a child who reminds him of glory days long past. Is that who you choose over your own blood? Morgan stepped forward, the Moonstone glowing with increasing intensity. I choose what the stone itself chose, healing over harm, balance over dominance, future over past. Celine's control finally shattered. With a scream of rage, she flung out her hand, dark energy crackling from her fingertips toward Morgan. The attack never landed. Thomas, moving with speed that belied his age and injuries, intercepted the blast. Dark energy engulfed him, lifting him from his feet before throwing him violently against the temple steps. Thomas, Morgan cried, rushing to where the old wolf lay crumpled and still. Celine advanced, power gathering around her like a storm cloud. Your protector falls, and you stand alone, child. Last chance, surrender the stone willingly. Morgan knelt beside Thomas, tears freezing on her cheeks in the mountain air. The old wolf's breathing came in ragged gasps, blood staining the snow beneath him. His eyes flickered open, finding hers with effort. Trust yourself, he managed, voice barely audible. Not just the stone. Understanding dawned in Morgan's eyes. She had been relying on the Moonstone's power as something separate from herself, but that was never its purpose. The crystal wasn't meant to bestow power, but to awaken what already existed within. She rose slowly, facing Celine with newfound clarity. The Moonstone at her throat pulsed in perfect synchronization with her heartbeat, no longer an external force, but an extension of her own essence. You're right about one thing, Morgan said, her voice steady. I do stand alone, but that's enough. Celine laughed. Brave words from one about to die. Not brave, Morgan corrected. True. She closed her eyes briefly, drawing not just on the Moonstone's power, but on everything that had brought her to this moment: Thomas's teachings, her own struggles as an outcast, the strength forged through adversity, the compassion born from suffering. When her eyes opened, they blazed with blue fire that matched the crystal's glow. Celine attacked again, darkness streaming from both hands in torrents of corrupting energy. This time, Morgan made no attempt to dodge. She stood her ground, palms raised to meet the onslaught. Where dark energy met blue light, a contest of wills manifested in visible shockwaves across the summit. For a moment, they appeared evenly matched: Celine, with centuries of accumulated power, Morgan with the Moonstone and newly awakened heritage. But balance tipped when Morgan spoke a single word imbued with authority beyond her years: heal. The Moonstone flared with blinding intensity. Its light expanded outward in a dome of pure energy, pushing back Celine's darkness inch by inch. The ancient sorceress struggled against the advance, her perfect features contorting with strain and disbelief. Impossible, she gasped. The stone responds to blood. My blood. Not just blood, Morgan replied, her voice carrying strange harmonics as the Moonstone amplified her words. But intent. The stone was created to heal, not harm, to balance, not dominate. It recognizes its true purpose in me. The dome of light continued expanding, washing over Celine despite her desperate resistance. Unlike Dominic, whose corruption had been extracted, Celine's darkness ran too deep, too fundamental to her being. As purifying light touched her, she began to change, first aging rapidly as centuries of unnatural preservation dissolved, then becoming translucent as her physical form destabilized. No, she screamed, her voice distorting. I will not be denied. Not after all this time. Morgan watched with compassion rather than triumph, as Celine's form continued to degrade, the magic sustaining her existence unraveling under the Moonstone's purifying influence. "Your time passed long ago," she said gently. "Let go." With a final cry of defiance, Celine's shadow moon dissolved completely, centuries of accumulated dark energy dissipating into the clear mountain air like mist before sunlight. The dome of light expanded beyond the summit, cascading down Frost Peak's slopes in waves of healing energy. Wherever it passed, snow melted, revealing dormant life beneath winter's blanket. Birds took flight from mountain forests, their calls heralding renewal. In villages below, wolves afflicted with moon rage suddenly found clarity, returning the darkness clouding their minds, lifting like a fever breaking. Morgan swayed the enormous expenditure of energy, nearly depleting her, despite the Moonstone's amplification. She turned back to Thomas, dropping to her knees beside the fallen warrior. His condition had worsened, breath coming in shallow gasps, eyes unfocused. "Hold on," she pleaded, placing her hands over his wounded chest. Blue healing energy flowed from her fingers, but weaker now, flickering like a candle in wind. "Don't you dare leave, old wolf, not when we've won." Thomas smiled faintly. "Some victories require sacrifice." "Not this one," Morgan insisted, tears flowing freely. "The territories need your wisdom. I need your wisdom. You have your own wisdom now." His weathered hand found hers, squeezing weakly. "My purpose is fulfilled." "No." Morgan's denial was fierce as she pressed the Moonstone directly against his chest. "Your purpose is just beginning. The territories need rebuilding. Alexander needs guidance. I need—" Her voice broke. "I need my friend." The Moonstone pulsed once, twice, three times against Thomas's chest. With each pulse, Morgan poured not just power but her own life force into the healing, risking herself to save him. Blue energy enveloped them both, creating a connection that transcended physical healing, a sharing of essence from one generation to the next. Thomas gasped, his back arching as the Moonstone's light penetrated to his core. For a terrible moment, Morgan feared she had failed. Then his eyes flew open, clear and alert, the wounds across his chest closing like water smoothing over sand. "That," he said when he could speak again, "was extremely unpleasant." Morgan laughed through her tears, helping him to a sitting position. "Next time, try not jumping in front of dark magic." "Noted." Thomas surveyed the summit, noting the absence of their adversary. "Celine, gone, permanently, I think. The Moonstone undid whatever magic kept her anchored to this world." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "So she was the source all along, manipulating events from the shadows using Dominic's spreading corruption." "Yes," Morgan confirmed. "I saw glimpses of her plan when the Moonstone connected with me. She's been working for centuries, waiting for someone of dual bloodline to claim the stone on her behalf. When Alexander prepared to take the throne, she accelerated her plans, fearing his reign would prevent her final move." Thomas rose cautiously, testing limbs that felt surprisingly strong, despite recent trauma. The healing had done more than mend wounds. It had restored vitality he hadn't felt in years, though the silver remained in his hair and the lines of experience on his face. "We should get down from this mountain," he said practically. "The territories have been without legitimate leadership too long." They gathered the transformed wolves who had once been Dominic's enhanced warriors, plus Dominic himself unconscious, but purged of corruption. Using a combination of Morgan's newfound abilities and Thomas's mountain experience, they began the descent toward the ancient grove where Samuel and Alexander awaited. The journey down proved considerably easier than the ascent. The Moonstone's influence had calmed the mountain's weather, and trails previously hidden by snow now stood revealed in sunlight. By nightfall, they reached the edge of the ancient grove where campfires beckoned welcomingly through the trees. Samuel rushed to meet them as they approached, relief evident on his face. "Uncle, we feared the worst when the mountain lit up like a beacon." His gaze shifted to Morgan, noting her transformation with widened eyes. "You found it." "We did," Thomas confirmed. "And more besides." "Where is Alexander?" Samuel gestured toward a large tent at the grove's center. "Still in wolf form, but calmer since that light washed over the mountain. He actually recognized me briefly." Morgan approached the tent, Thomas and Samuel following close behind. Inside, the massive black wolf that was their rightful king lay curled on a bed of furs, his intelligent eyes tracking their entrance with newfound awareness, though still trapped in animal form. Alexander, Morgan said softly, kneeling beside him. I've brought something that belongs to you as much as to the territories. She removed the moonstone from around her neck, holding it before the wolf's golden eyes. Alexander stared at the crystal recognition flickering in his gaze. This won't be pleasant, Morgan warned, but it's necessary. At Alexander's slight nod of understanding, she pressed the stone against his forehead. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Alexander's body convulsed, a howl of pain escaping as dark energy began pulling from him, just as it had from Dominic. The extraction appeared more difficult, more thoroughly entrenched after months of corruption. Morgan struggled to strain evident as sweat beaded on her forehead. Thomas placed a supportive hand on her shoulder, lending strength through their connection. Samuel watched in anxious silence as his cousin fought an internal battle, visible only through physical manifestations, painful spasms, and haunted eyes. After what seemed an eternity, Alexander's form began to change, not the violent, uncontrolled shifting of moon rage, but the smooth transformation of natural ability restored. The black wolf elongated fur receding until a man lay before them. Early 30s, dark hair streaked prematurely with silver from his ordeal, face gaunt but handsome. Alexander Blackwood, rightful alpha king of the territories, drew his first conscious human breath in 6 months. His voice, when he finally spoke, emerged rough from disuse, but unmistakably royal in its quiet authority. Thomas Greymane, he said, recognition warming his exhausted features. My father always said you would return when the territories needed you most. Thomas bowed his head respectfully. Your father was wiser than he sometimes demonstrated, my king. Alexander turned to Morgan, studying her with newfound clarity. And you, the girl without a wolf who turns out to have the most powerful wolf of all. His gaze shifted to the moonstone in her hands. My gratitude seems inadequate for what you've done. It wasn't just me, Morgan demurred. Without Thomas's guidance, I would never have discovered my heritage or reached the moonstone. A partnership of youth and experience, Alexander observed thoughtfully. Perhaps a model for governance moving forward. The following days saw rapid changes sweep the territories. Word spread of Alexander's recovery, Morgan's emergence as the White Queen's heir, and Thomas's triumphant return from exile. Villages that had suffered under Dominic's corrupt rule found hope rekindling as the effects of moon rage dissipated throughout the lands. A week after the events on Frost Peak Mountain, they returned to Silvercrest Castle. Unlike the secret departure of a small band of resistance fighters, their return became a procession that grew with each village they passed, citizens joining to welcome their rightful king and the heroes who had restored him. The castle itself, for so long a symbol of oppression, underwent transformation. Alexander ordered its gates permanently opened, the dungeons emptied of political prisoners, the great hall repurposed for public audiences where any citizen could bring concerns directly to the crown. Dominic, purged of corruption but not absolved of responsibility for his actions, faced judgment before a council of elders from all 7 territories. In recognition of his manipulation by Celine but acknowledgement of his willing participation, he was sentenced not to death but to service rebuilding the communities his policies had damaged. On the 30th day after the Moonstone's recovery, a formal coronation took place in Silvercrest's Great Hall. Alexander Blackwood knelt before assembled representatives of all territories while Morgan, bearing the Moonstone, placed the ancient crown of unified wolves upon his head. Rise, Alexander Blackwood, she proclaimed, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. Alpha King of the United Territories, guardian of the moon, covenant protector of all wolves. Alexander rose to thunderous approval, his once gaunt face now restored to health, his bearing confident but tempered by recent trials. He raised a hand for silence before speaking. My first act as crowned king is to establish a new council of wisdom, he announced. Unlike councils past which merely echoed the Alpha's will, this body will provide true guidance, drawing on diverse experience from across our lands. He gestured to Thomas, who stood to one side in new garments, befitting his restored status. Thomas Greymane, once exiled as traitor, now recognized as our realm's greatest patriot, will serve as elder guardian, the highest advisory position in our governance. Thomas stepped forward, bowing deeply before his king. I am honored, my king, though I fear these old bones may not serve for many years. Your bones seem remarkably spry for their age, Alexander replied with a knowing smile, particularly since a certain healing light touched them. Besides, it is not length of service I require, but depth of wisdom while it lasts. The ceremonial day concluded with a feast open to all citizens, nobles and commoners alike, sharing tables in unprecedented equality. As celebrations continued into evening, Thomas found a moment of quiet on a castle balcony overlooking the territories. Morgan joined him there, the Moonstone still at her throat, though its glow had subdued to a gentle pulse. "Having second thoughts about your new position, Elder Guardian?" she asked, noting his contemplative expression. Thomas smiled, shaking his head. "Reflecting, not doubting. When I returned from exile, I expected to die confronting old wrongs. Instead, I find myself helping build a new future. A future that wouldn't exist without you," Morgan pointed out. "Your wisdom guided us when strength alone would have failed." "Our wisdom," Thomas corrected. "You possess an old soul and a young body, Morgan Moonshade. Or should I say Lady Healer?" Morgan touched the Moonstone reflexively, still adjusting to her new title and responsibilities as the territory's spiritual guardian. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm worthy of this role, if my youth will undermine my effectiveness." "Age is merely time accumulated," Thomas replied. "Worth is determined by how one uses whatever time they're given, whether 17 years or 70. He gestured toward the celebrating citizens below. "These people don't follow you because of age or title, but because you embody something they desperately need, hope, renewal, connection to traditions they'd nearly forgotten." Morgan considered this, then asked the question that had lingered since their descent from the mountain. "What happens now, for you, I mean?" "Now." Thomas gazed across the lands he had once thought never to see again, his expression peaceful. "Now I do what old wolves do best. I share stories with the young, offer counsel. When asked, watch the seasons change, and take pleasure in seeing saplings I've nurtured grow strong enough to withstand their own winters." He turned to her, eyes crinkling with genuine warmth. "And occasionally I'll remind a certain young healer that she saved not just a king or a territory, but an old man who had forgotten his own worth." Morgan's eyes misted. "The territories need you, Thomas." "For a while," he agreed, "but they'll need you longer." The Moonstone chose well. Below them, bonfires blazed across the city as citizens celebrated their renewal. Beyond the capital, similar celebrations illuminated villages throughout the territories, unified in joy as they hadn't been in generations. Winter was giving way to spring in the land and in the hearts of its people. The cycle of seasons continued as it always had and always would. But this time the transition was guided by wisdom born of experience and energy, born of youth, a partnership that promised balance for generations to come. Thomas Greymane, once scorned as a traitor, now honored as elder guardian, watched the future unfold with the quiet satisfaction of one who had completed a long journey home. Not to a place, but to a purpose. The discovery that wisdom shared becomes wisdom multiplied, and that no life, however long or challenging, is ever wasted when its lessons serve those who follow. In the soft evening light, the old wolf and the young healer stood together, different in age, but united in purpose, as the first stars of a new era dawned over the United Territories.